So welcome to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. I'm here with Todd Callender, and Todd, I just want to welcome you to the show. Just can you just tell us just briefly a little bit about yourself? There's a whole lot. When I've kind of researched you, there's just so much that you've done and really talked about and done a whole lot with your life. Can you just kind of tell us just briefly a little bit about your background and kind of where you're at
Sure.
now?
Well, I'm imitating Elvis, trying to be everywhere. It's not working very well, Peter. Thank you. Yeah, listen, I lived a very quiet, private life as an insurance executive in the Caribbean for the last 20 some years. I'm a lawyer by training, and I actually came from the vaccine business. If you can imagine, in the early 1990s, my job was to get a needle-free mass vaccination injector through the FDA process. My family acquired the intellectual property rights. My job was to get it through the IND process. And so I spent 3 years in Cuba overseeing clinical trials to make that happen. My family's company continues on, and over the 20 years after I got the company approved by or the technology actually approved by the FDA, our family company, run by my sister, has tested all kinds of vaccines through the years. And I was actually responsible for bringing WHO and Pfizer, amongst others, into Cuba. I was the first guy there, but allowed by our government. My point in telling you this is that in 2020, when there were ramblings of the Secretary of Defense, who was going to authorize the use of mRNA shots, it was an existing technology that we knew about because we'd been testing mRNA for 20 years. And I knew that it was, in fact, still experimental and it had not been rolled out widely in human use. And so when Secretary Austin said, we're going to force 1.4 million service members to take this shot, I couldn't stand by. And so I filed a temporary restraining order against the DoD, HHS, and FDA in August of 2021. And that led me on this 3 year journey in the courts in fighting with our government, the DoD in particular, whereby we discovered things, as you do as a lawyer, right? As you're going through trials, you learn a lot. And we had, hundreds of thousands of service members that were interested in this case, a presumptive class of plaintiffs. And we ended up getting a whole lot of whistleblowers, not just from our government, but from governments around the world, that really introduced to us that we're in the middle of a democide, a genocide, except it's the whole world. And it is being perpetrated effectively by our Department of Defense, which took over the public health responsibility as early as 2019. And public health has been used as a mechanism to not only control the world but depopulate it as well. And so these are the weighty issues we've been dealing with for 3+ years, and I've been screaming from the top of every rooftop I can find, trying to get people to understand this. And that's perhaps part of why we're here, because I ended up buying our group bought a platform, a social media platform called CloutHub, to further that potentiality, the ability to raise people's awareness.
When you're saying Cloud Hub, CLOUTHUB, is that right?
That's exactly right.
Right.
A guy by the name of Jeff Brain had built it some years ago. Unfortunately, he died, and we took it over.
Okay. And now the main purpose of Cloud Hub is like what is the main purpose of it? You said
Yeah,
it's to kind of get people together, but right now, I mean,
yeah.
we're together right now with Zoom, and you can use Teams and all that stuff. So
Yeah,
what distinguishes you from everything else? GoToMeeting.com or whatever it happens to be.
sure. Lord above, thank you. So it was a new venture for me, Peter, into the social media business. It's completely new and different. I didn't understand, but what I did understand is that Zoom, for example, what we're using today, all of this data, what it is you and I are doing and talking about, even our likenesses, are now the property of the Chinese government. Right? Zoom keeps their servers in the intelligence headquarters of their government, and they claim and take ownership over everything related to this, as do all of them. Google, Microsoft, Meets, everything that you think is private is not. And so one of the reasons we ended up acquiring the company and investing very heavily in it was to build out a video conferencing capability like this one that does instant translation. But more importantly, I mean, you can talk to anybody in the world, 72 different languages. But more importantly, we built it really with 400 million Chinese Christians and Persian Christians in mind. When these people attend Bible study on Zoom, that information is provided to their governments, and these people end up becoming body part donors. It's no joke. And so we built this in such a way that people could not only communicate anywhere in the world in any language, but have the confidence that when they went to their Bible study or had whatever meeting it was, and I'll get to the Brazilians in a minute, that information wasn't going anywhere. So we built it to be anonymous. We built it to be private end-to-end encryption. And most importantly, we built it so that when the meeting is done, it never happened. There's no record it ever happened, only that your computer happened to be on the internet, nothing more. Browser-based only. And the only recording of it is if you take one or somebody takes a transcript of it, but you'd have to be a participant and authorized to do that. So we built it with privacy and anonymity in mind. That's our formula: privacy plus anonymity equals freedom. And we built the Clout Hub platform that way. It's a social media platform. People upload videos. Again, you can watch them in any of 60 languages if you want to. We have a groups section where 160,000 Brazilians, by way of example, were upset at the stealing of the election. They put Lula in office there, and they coordinated together to figure out how to take the government back, lawfully, obviously. But we created an area for them to be safe to do that. There's a community section. The whole thing is focused on empowering people to save their information, to not be geo-fenced, to not be tracked and traced. We are the censorship-free liberty platform.
So right now, like if we were on your network,
yeah.
So if somebody else was on it, they would see that you and I were talking, but they couldn't see where we were, who our names were, and they couldn't keep that for a really long period of time. No one can be doing it unless they were invited into the group, etc.
Yeah, that's right. And when the meeting is closed, there's no record it ever happened. It literally, the only thing a person could see, if a government came knocking on your door and said, give us your computer, the only thing they could possibly tell is that you were on the internet at that moment in time. Nothing more. Not what content, not where you were, not who you talked to, nothing.
So it's fascinating to me that you're doing this for Christians. I have my last book I wrote is on the Christian duty of civil disobedience. It's because I recognize that as Christians we're in a new stage, and obviously Christians in the East are they're in a unique situation of persecution that we're not experiencing in the West as of yet. I believe we're heading in that direction. And I wrote the book in order to help people understand when we need to respond back, how we need to respond back. But I think we've gotten so comfortable just in our day-to-day transactions and just, hey, we can go to church and not really care. There's not that much pressure on us to not go to church. But it almost seems like this is kind of like the old underground church that you're just doing it through the internet.
Yeah.
I mean,
right. And making it possible for everybody to do it together. That was the whole point. But the language translation was a really important feature to this. Also because I wanted to eliminate the gatekeepers of truth. Right, governments own the media apparatus. They're feeding us a bunch of hogwash all day, every day. I wanted people to be able to talk to their colleagues in any country in any language and get the truth directly. At the end of the day, Peter, it's about truth. That the survival of our species depends entirely on us finding the truth and demanding it of others. And so this is where the project was born, of that need. And that's why we're in business, and it's working. What we're coming to find on our channels section is we're getting God, guns, and country people. Right? Somebody wants to talk about how they do self-defense with their weapon. They can do that. They can do a video and we'll play it. We have no prohibitions on that. Some people want to talk about how the kill shots, otherwise known as COVID vaccines. Come and talk about it. You can say anything you want to. What we don't allow is gambling and porn, but we encourage intellectually honest debate, the marketplace of ideas. And so what we're saying is people who are worried about BlackRock that just bought the majority interest in Rumble. People are worried about YouTube. They're already shadow banned. I'm shadow banned all over creation because of what I say. So it was almost a necessity to acquire this platform just to have this conversation.
So if we want, going back to the 80s when I grew up, 70s and 80s is when I grew up, and I remember there was the book, The Anarchist Cookbook, that was this huge, banned book, but you could still get a hold of it to get a copy of it. It basically taught you how to build bombs. It taught you a lot of that stuff, which arguably at that time, interesting conservatives were more against that type of stuff and was trying to ban it. Now it's kind of flip-flopped more to liberals trying to ban it.
Go figure.
But when you look at something that could be really potentially dangerous getting into the wrong hands and people that are just clinically insane, that can find this type of information, uh, should there be some type of safeguards? I'm a civil rights person, so
Yeah.
it's kind of hard for me to determine where that is. But I'm just curious to know where your
Well,
opinion is on this. Where should the safeguards be, or should there be any?
this is not my job. There are already safeguards. You're a lawyer. It's Title 18 of everybody's statutes of the Penal Code. And there's already laws against that. I don't need to be doing those jobs. I haven't been a prosecutor in almost 30 years. So that is already in place. There's no need for me to do that job for somebody else, right? Whoever is resident in whatever country, county or otherwise, is subject to those laws, irrespective of what it is they do on my platform.
So when they want to have it, say in China, they want to attend a online church using your platform. Obviously, they're breaking the law doing so, but that's part of this, just their decision
Well,
whether they're wanting to do it or not do it.
I think you'll appreciate this from a jurisdictional point of view. China only has jurisdiction over such a program if there's an app sold in China. One of the reasons we are browser based is because we don't require an app. You can just go into the browser, no different than you could go in a browser anywhere else in the world if you wanted to. That is up to the Chinese. I'm not going to regulate Chinese behavior as much as I'm not going to regulate anybody else's behavior. There are already people that do that job.
Okay, that's fascinating. I mean, it really is because I was curious on that piece of it because so part of the way China is able to get involved with a lot of this stuff is through owning the property or at least
That's
owning
right.
people that have it.
Or licensing the apps, right?
Right, right.
If you sell your app in China, you're confessing jurisdiction to the Chinese and their laws. I am not in China. Our servers are not in China. I'm not going to put any in there, and therefore I am not subject to their laws.
I'm curious, what is your opinion if China were to right now, if there was a revolution that was able to occur in China and that Chinese government at best becomes unstable with as much as they have in technology realm,
Yeah.
what do you see happening from something like that? I've never really kind of considered it until you started talking about it, and I started kind of putting all these
Yeah.
things together in my head, and I'm like, man, that could just jack our entire world up if something like that were to happen.
Well, at the end of the day, this is about truth, and the truth just is what it is. Truth is agnostic, right? It isn't good or bad. It just is, and people and countries have to deal with it as it is. So let me, by way of example, say, okay, let's say I get a knock on the door from the Chinese government, and they say, "Give us all the data you got on your people." Well, our privacy policy says we don't want your data. Don't give it to us. We're not going to track it. All we need is a username and an email address. And if the FBI or the Chinese or whoever want the email names or email addresses and username, they have them anyway. What people do with their communications, whether it's by telephone, whether it's by carrier pigeon, is up to them. And the short answer is we are making it easier for people to communicate. And what it is they do with that communication is up to them. And yes, could this be world changing, having free access to information that other people on the other ideas? The answer is yes. That's the whole point of this. Our founding fathers said it was the marketplace of idea, right? That's what brings the best result, is intellectually honest, rigorous debate brings the best ideas forward. That's exactly what we're doing. We're creating the platform for that very conversation in any language, all at the same time, for these very reasons.
You mentioned Cuba. One of the bigger influences I had when I was younger, my Spanish teacher. I mean, I'm terrible at Spanish, can't speak a lick of it even now. I took 4 years, and I could say Mary's in the kitchen. I mean, so, but he was kicked out of he actually served in prison, and when Castro took over, he was kicked out of the country when all the others were kicked out. He came to Tennessee, became a Spanish teacher, but he wrote an underground newspaper. His brother was part of the secret police, and they lived in the same house, same room, and they had to find the brother's duty was to try to find who was writing this paper. I mean, seriously, like it's an incredible story. Like I never knew the brother's name. He always talked about his brother, my communist, the brother, the communist. That's all. That's all he ever referenced him as. But anyway, he served time in jail from it and was released when Castro released all the prisoners and
Yeah,
everybody else. So,
Maribola.
but what's fascinating to me is this idea of, again, that you have to have free speech, because when Castro obviously took over, he eliminated it, recognized the
Yeah,
importance of it, even if I
right.
disagree with it. And you have places or groups like the ACLU that used to, like they would defend this Nazi skinheads, but now it seems like they're arguing in favor of
Yes,
suppressing the truth and
that's right.
not really worrying about civil liberties and
That's
doing
right.
that stuff. What do you think shifted on that? I mean, again, you've been a lawyer for a while. You've seen that change, and
Yeah.
so what do you think caused that shift to where those groups
I
changed so
can
much?
tell you. I can tell you where. First and foremost, I have lived and worked in two communist countries. Before Cuba, I was in Poland undoing the Soviet model economy in the early 1990s. I worked for the biggest law firm in Poland, do mass privatization. And so I had to undo what the communists did, a Soviet model economy, which is an oligopoly, public-private partnership. Where have we heard that before? And this is what you find is the leftist mentality has a control problem. So, for instance, I spent 3 years in Cuba. I was the very first American licensed and authorized to go there. I had to get past the Trading with the Enemy Act and licenses from our government. So I was dealing with the highest levels of the Cuban government, and our government was a big deal. And so I had the opportunity to see this really from the inside. And what you find in a communist nation, which is where our government and the World Economic Forum and the UN are trying to take us, right? Be very clear on this. The agenda for the 21st century is communist based. Is that you find people in Cuba in the same household, they don't have a way to meet their human need, genetically ingrained in us, to better our lives and those of us that come behind us. Parents will die trying to make their kids' lives better, right? But the Cubans have nothing to do for that advantage. So what do they trade? They don't have an extra allotment of grain this week, or a piece of bread to trade. They have information to trade. And so what you find is that everybody's narking on everybody, and the police is all controlled, but also the controllers of the entire population. Everybody's terrified. The secret police are going to come and drag them away and do all these things. And because everybody's telling on everybody else, it is the most horrible, dismal place you can possibly imagine. It's horrific, and it kills the human spirit. So part of what it is I'm doing is, as a reaction of this, having seen this, lived and worked in two communist countries, we are headed towards a Soviet model economy. When you hear things like public-private partnership, what you're seeing is the liberal mind, the communist mind, becoming more and more totalitarian as humans reject this naturally. It's against God's laws and human laws alike. What you find is the totalitarians grab tighter and they outlaw this and that and speech. And this is what you're seeing in the social media space, is that now the Federal Communications Commission came out a month ago and said, we are now in charge of content. We're going to get the artificial intelligence is going to control the content of all social media companies in the United States. They created something here called malinformation. We are now terrorists for speaking malinformation. That's a special designation that unleashes the Patriot Act on us. Malinformation being defined as something truthful, but in the world of government, harmful to their opinions, their policies, and government views. So if it's not good for the government, it's not good for that totalitarian viewpoint, then that information, even though it's correct, is malinformation and outlawed. So we are already there in the information war. This could be Cuba. This could be the old Soviet Union. And by the way, the Russians are going the other way. Right? They've already had their communist experiment. They know it doesn't work, and they're abandoning it with great haste.
The Demas's family has been in the restaurant business for many generations. We have been serving people in the Middle Tennessee market for 34 years, and some of the recipes that we've had have garnered national attention. Some of these have been our award-winning banana pudding and our famous baked chicken and rice soup. When you're sick, you got cold or flu, there is nothing that tastes better and that gives you almost kind of a healing component than our baked chicken and rice soup. So order some today at demasfamilykitchen.com and let my family be able to serve your family. I'm a understand that governments lead by the principles or by power, by force.
That's right.
There has to be, and for me, there's only one true principle that stays, and that's the Bible. It's the Holy Word of God.
That's right.
So when you see governments that aren't that aren't principally based, that do not have that foundation, or the people in our government do not have the foundation of a Christian based system, a Judeo-Christian based system, is where I see it's just so much easier for that power to kick in, and that type of
That's right.
control, because they think they're smarter than us. Did you see that in Cuba and Poland, where you thought
Yes.
that they thought they were smarter than the people, so therefore they could justify these controls, this malinformation that you're talking about?
The answer is yes, absolutely. But on top of that, I guess that's a prerequisite what you described. But on top of that, they also rule by fear. And in order to make people like you and I fearful, they have to take God out of our lives. Right? That's the first thing. That's the first order of business. So when I was in Poland, it was a crazy juxtaposition because at the time, Pope John Paul was recently Pope. He was from Poland,
Right.
right? And 99% of Poland was Catholic, certainly Christian. And yet the Soviet Empire would not allow the practice of religion. They controlled people through fear, and they couldn't allow guys like you and I that believe in our Creator being unafraid. We're not afraid of death. And I actually saw not just, I mean, as it relates to the factors you're talking about, but there's a very same control paradigm when our government, whether that's the military or otherwise, said, you're going to take these shots, which we now know, right? Genetic modification shots that actually kill people. But aside from that, what happened the day I sued the DOD, it was the first lawsuit against them. I had thousands and thousands of service members coming, help me get out of these shots. What are we going to do? Our little law firm, me and two other lawyers, were just inundated with people. I mean, it was insane. I don't think we slept for a week. Thousands and thousands of people. And what I'm telling you from this is that all of them had a relationship with God. The people that discerned these shots, the mark of the beast or whatever it was in their minds, they all had a relationship with God. 99% of them were Christian. We had some Jews and some Muslims in there as well, but all of them had a relationship with God. Why? Because they didn't fear. They weren't falling for that same paradigm. You're going to die by COVID if you don't get this thing. And that's the freedom part, right? And that's why we call it faith over fear, Peter. That's what it is. And when we don't have that fear, when we also put aside all the division, somebody's black, white, gay, or whatever, we also can't be divided and conquered. And so that's the other part of CloudHub. I don't care. It's a libertarian platform. I don't care, what sex or anything else about you. I don't care. It's not material. What is material? What does matter is the intellectually honest debate that comes out of your noggin.
People think sometimes the opposite of fear is courage, and I argue the opposite of fear is trust, because you can have Medal of Honor winners that will say they're fearful when they commit these acts of bravery and courage. But to me, it falls into a trust. So do I trust God to see me through these circumstances? Do I see him
Beautiful.
take? And so I agree with you completely that when these governments institute fear, and I think 2020 was a classic example of that worldwide. Fear was unique in all different areas, whether you were on the right or the left. It was unreal to watch the people just do whatever they could. I'm in the restaurant business, and watching people come in afraid of every little thing. I'm serious. Like, they
even with their mask on.
Oh, I'll tell you, they would get DeGorders orders because we were shut down for a while, and they would get DeGorders orders, and some of them would put a sign up on the window saying, put the bag on the curb, and you would have to put the bag on the curb. They would wipe the bag down, get it up when you'd go inside. I mean, it was insane watching what was happening around us, and also not knowing everything yourself. So you're kind of like, and finally, ultimately, that's just what I had to say, which is I'm going to trust God to see me through whatever it is. Because I have the 1,000-year plan. I don't have the next year plan.
That's right.
I'm looking at where I'm going to end up. And for me, there's a comfort in that. But I watched all these people, again, take that vaccine, or they do this stuff because they were afraid I wouldn't be able to travel anymore. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. And yet the government started attacking the religious side. So when you were battling that, you know, and a lot of people are putting up these religious objections. What
Yep.
was their argument against the religious objections?
Unbelievable. It was unbelievable, Peter. So it's important to understand, again, from a legal perspective, a few things. Number one, 13 March 2020, President Trump declared a national emergency. That had the effect of removing constitutional protections. It was immediately followed by a public health emergency declaration and eventually a public health emergency of international concern declaration. Those have the effect of suspending your human rights. Believe it or not, our government made a declaration of a Marburg pandemic on, I think it was the 9th of December, 2020. There's no Marburg anywhere, but that had provisions in the PrEP Act that created a replacement law to govern our country. You can find it, look it up for yourself, 42 CFR Part 70 and 71. So we've been under this medical martial law, which is now a military responsibility, by the way. Public health was moved under the Department of Defense through the National Defense Authorization Acts from 2019 until 2023. So going back to the issues, how did we get here and what is it about, and the fear function, and how did you get around the people afraid of the bags and things of that nature. Take the military for an example. When we sued the DOD, the Secretary of Defense had authorized use of force. And we filed a TRO, and immediately what the reaction was, not just religious exemptions, which you asked about, but there are 4 enumerated other exemptions in military law that are absolute. You don't have to take the shots if you qualify for any one of these. The government and the courts, pursuant to something called the Bureau of Justice, they combined, when this public health declaration happens, they combined the amalgamation of, really effectively, of public health, law enforcement, corrections, and the judiciary. So the Article 3 courts in all of our cases ended up agreeing with themselves across all circuits. We don't have jurisdiction to hear your case. The military said, we don't have jurisdiction to consider your religious request, and they denied them all. So the effect of removing our constitutional rights and our human rights, which are more importantly, those are protected by international law, International Convention on Human Rights, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the Nuremberg Codex, all said you can't experiment on people without informed consent. Well, you know what? There was no informed consent.
No.
They removed those rights, right, by virtue, and they'd been working on this for 40 or 50 years legally. I could send you a really interesting talk I gave to the Croatian Parliament on this, because here we go again, Peter. There was a Marburg Declaration again in December last, just a month ago. Our government said on January 1, 2024, there's going to be a Marburg pandemic. Why? Because as you read through the law, that Marburg pandemic has all these legal results, consequences, where the judiciary and law enforcement are one. They never denied any of our cases. In any of the cases that got filed, all they did was file motions to dismiss. They were responsive pleadings, because our Constitution remains suspended, our human rights remain suspended until August of 2028. That's how. That's why. We don't even, Peter, at this point in time, I can tell you the law is this. If they being any government on this planet, wants to line everybody up against a wall and shoot them dead with liquid or lead, makes no difference. The result is the same. They have granted onto themselves this power, because countries will not prosecute other countries in the International Court of Justice or International Criminal Court for public health. It's above reproach. You can't question this. That makes Tedros Adhanom the most powerful man in the world. He's the director of the WHO, and thanks to the International Health Regulation Amendments, the 2005 ones, all of our governments agreed, including the United States of America, that the Department of Defense will be his thugs. The DOD is now under that guy when there's a public health emergency of international concern declared. Well, guess what? There already is one. Monkeypox is already out. The mere sniffle alone in Timbuktu entitles Tedros to go and kill everybody if he wants to, anywhere in the world. That's where we sit today.
But what I don't understand is, with the volume of judicial activism that we've seen, I mean, even going back all the way back to Marble versus Madison. I mean, you go
Sure.
all the way back to there. they opened the door for judicial activism, which again,
Yes.
I'm in favor of. I'm not against that court case, but I've seen it all the way even through, and then you get the Brennan court, and you got all that stuff, and you got a lot of those judges that are just even on the lower courts. It's shocking to me that you did not see more judicial activism saying, no, wait a second, we need to step up right here because this is not right. But it seemed like they fell under that mindset of fear as well. They didn't want
They did.
to deal with it as well. But I can't. It baffles me to
The,
think that judges wouldn't do that.
the national security apparatus took over. Don't forget, we are under medical martial law. The military is in charge. And so the military effectively told the courts, the Article 3 courts, you don't have jurisdiction to hear this. We saw it very early, and right after I filed my suit, there was another suit filed in Washington, D.C. The court said, we're going to injunct the DOD, no more of this. The DOD responded through the Department of Justice, it's in the minute order. We're not going to comply with the court's order. And they didn't. And that case went away on national security grounds. That's why we're here. And by the way, we also filed something called a writ quo warranto. I would highly recommend you look into that, because as a part of this litigation, we came to find that not a single member of our cabinet, of the appointed positions, not one of them has a valid oath of office. Many didn't bother to take one. Janet Yellen, Secretary of Treasury, Buttigieg, Department of Transportation, Alejandro Mayorkas, in charge of the border, Department of Homeland Security. None of them bothered to do a required oath of office in writing. The statute is 5 U.S.C. 331, 331, and 332. That's 3 3s and a 2. And if they don't have a written sworn oath of office, then everything they do is void ab initio. Not a single one, from Kamala Harris on down, not one of them has a valid oath of office. So what that should tell you.
How do you find that? Like if I wanted to look to see Mayorkas, for example, whether he filed or didn't file,
Yes.
How do I find that?
Freedom of Information Act request. We requested all of them. And the one for Jack Smith is fascinating. The guy prosecuting Trump, the Department of Justice responded and said, yeah, we know these two that we just provided you are defective, and we should probably get one that isn't defective. And then didn't say anything more. It took 9 months for the Department of Defense to provide us Mr. Austin's oath of office, which was defective. 9 months. The number one law enforcement officer in the United States of America, the Attorney General, doesn't even have an appointment date on his. So he's not lawfully serving. And we have the written evidence. And so because we knew the Attorney General didn't have a legal oath of office, we served the U.S. Attorney with the writ quo warranto. And Rochelle Walensky from the FDA resigned almost immediately because she also didn't have an oath of office, as the statute requires. Let us remember that without an oath of office, they're impersonating federal officials. That's a crime. In some cases, impersonating federal law enforcement officials. That's a bad crime. None of them have them. And so the point is, by the time we'd served the U.S. Attorney, we got back the Freedom of Information Act request on him. He also had a defective oath of office. Oh, well, what do we do now? Where do we seek redress? Well, the redress, according to the statute, is the District Court, Federal District Court of Washington, D.C. Before we filed it, we said, who in D.C. has an oath of office? One judge. One judge in the Federal District Courts of Washington, D.C. has a valid oath of office.
And when you say
what does that say about our government?
Well, I mean, we already see, I mean, our government, I mean, that yeah, we can go to any particular area. I was actually talking to my wife about this 2 days ago, and I was like, do we see anybody that Biden appointed that's capable or competent? Like I've yet to see one person in there, and I want to hope that somebody does a good job on some level, but I haven't seen one in there. But when you say defective, you know, I mean, I can file a mortgage and I accidentally write something in the wrong line. You know, there's the other document that goes along with it that says, hey, they can make the change. It's not going to mean you can't pay. So are you talking about defective of, you know, I wrote down the wrong date by mistake? Are you talking about missing defective or is it like severely defective to make it void? Where does it all kind of fall when you reference the word defective?
Well, it's pretty hard to get more defective than just not doing it.
Okay, so missing
Right?
then, not defective.
No, not all of them. Not
Yeah,
all of them, but
yeah.
some are, and others, yeah, they're either not sworn, right? So in COVID, we had a replacement statute that said if you can't get this thing notarized, you can swear under penalty of perjury, and that's fine too. There's a statute on the subject matter, but without it being attested to, notarized, it is defective. And so a lot of them just had somebody, kind of witness it. But aside from that, they, in taken in context, one or two of these, I get what you're saying. There's something called the de facto officer doctrine. There's
Right,
case law
yeah,
on
yeah.
this. Okay. And you get that and you go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Somebody made a mistake. Fine. But when you have all of them defective, all of them, Peter, that's a plan. And by the way, this plan was rolled out in 1963. On January 10, 1963, the Communist Manifesto was read into our congressional record. Item 13 out of 45 different items that needed to be completed in order to turn the United States of America into a communist nation. Item 13 is remove oaths of office. If you read through that checklist of 45 items, you'll find that they've all been completed. Tick, 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 tick. And lo and behold, January 10 of 2023, 60 years to the day later, after the naked communist was read into the congressional record, Joe Biden goes to Mexico City and he meets with Trudeau and Obrador, and they made the Declaration of North America. He put that as an executive order. The President of the United States, by executive order, said the U.S. is no more. We are now part of the North American area. And immediately thereafter, he welded our borders open. That is, under international law, which is what I practice, that is the dissolution of your nation. How does one have sovereignty? You mark out an area and you defend it. You say, here's our laws, here's our troops. If you no longer have a defined area, that's a huge kink in the whole plan to say we're sovereign. And the other things in addition to that make this the point. We are no longer a sovereign nation. It was given away. Again, I admit it, but the point is that this was a plan. And since 1963, that same year they killed our president, Mr. Kennedy, we've come to find that there are just a smattering, a handful of oaths. And it's not just federal. We'd found this in the States too. In fact, my paralegal and research assistant, she's actually a researcher, Lisa McGee, has a project called Project Proper Oath. And there are people all over the United States now, and they're doing Freedom of Information Act requests, state and federal, to find out who's got an oath of office and who doesn't. Because you know what? If you don't have an oath, two things. Number one, who are you serving? And the answer is yourself.
Right.
Secondarily to that, if you don't have an oath of office, you're impersonating an official, state or a federal official. And what we came to find is a lot of sheriffs don't have an oath of office. A lot of district attorneys general don't have oaths of office as required by statute. That, sir, is a plan, not a mistake.
So, all right, it's an oath. It's a piece of paper, and I recognize there's a law on it. So
now look at the jury instructions. Look at the jury instructions, and they say if you're going to go after somebody for sedition or treason, you must demonstrate with written evidence that they had a duty. How does one manifest the duty? It is the oath of office. So what they've done is they've traded out for criminal law. You can charge me with impersonating a federal official. Right? They'll get some little stupid, penalty for that, but it's not going to be treason and sedition because you can't prove it.
So the fact that they have impersonated somebody for that period of time is irrelevant when it comes to something like treason or sedition or anything of that nature. So that's where the importance is to prove that they had that oath to our country, to the people. It's more for the proof. If it's not right,
why it had to be sworn, Peter.
Right.
It's why it has to be sworn.
I say all the time, if it's not written down, it doesn't happen.
Right.
So it's that same type of thing. So I can give you an oath all we want to right here. The only people besides the Chinese now that'll keep this will, but that's going to be irrelevant, right? I mean, it doesn't mean anything because it's just not as good as the paper it's written on.
That's right. You got that exactly right.
So now that they have done this, what purpose do you think? I mean, because you get a whole lot of people to create this level of conspiracy to do this. There has to be some type
Yes,
of incentive for somebody
sure.
to work their way up to this level of position. Where do you think that comes from? Where it has to be something bigger that goes beyond that. Where do you think
Well,
that is?
sure, but I mean, let us understand that these people are selected for these positions. They are groomed to fill these positions. You look at Klaus Schwab's leadership, Young Global Leaders program. Yale and Harvard have programs that do this. I met with a great lawyer, Francis Boyle, father of the bioweapons treaty. And there's one person per year that gets chosen for this program. It's a PhD program. Henry Kissinger himself used to teach this program. It's a Machiavellian school for criminal minds, and he'll tell you that. And so the people are actually groomed for this very position, and they make a trade, and the trade is their soul for success. And it doesn't matter whether they're Democrat or Republican, because it all is one and the same. It all leads to the same place. And it leads back to the owners of this world, defined as those that make money out of thin air, and they loan it to governments, loan it, something that has no value. They say, here, government, we're going to loan this to you. We want it back. And by the way, it has a stated value of this. You're going to collateralize all your national assets, including the earning potential of your citizens in furtherance of this loan. If you don't repay that piece of paper, we're gonna foreclose on those things. We live in a global debt model economy where the Bank for International Settlements, that owns all of the private central banks on this planet, save three, makes money out of thin air. And if you could make money out of thin air, what could you not own? And the answer is nothing. And that's right, they own everything. In fact, governments are a facade. They are the fact that they don't have oaths is the whole point here. They are owned. The government itself is owned. And these wars and all this other kind of stuff that happens is because the owners of this world want it to happen. It's because they are moving goods and services or people from one place to another. Project Paperclip, right? World War II ends. What happened to all the bright German Nazis? They ended up being scientists and things in our government. The CIA was born of those very same people coming into our government. So it's all just a big fiction, to be frank, Peter. And at the end of the day, our job is truth and humanity arising. This is our opportunity to take our planet back. Taking our planet back means rebuilding our republic. I don't care that Mr. Austin made this declaration and our Congress did nothing. Our judiciary did nothing to stop him from dissolving our country. Screw him. And there's a whole lot of other people thinking like that too. And I think this is why you have Mr. Trump, who's representing our republic, the notion of a nation, not Washington, D.C., the 10 square miles. I think that's Joe Biden. But over here, you got a guy who says America first, make America great again. Look, I got my own problems with the guy as it relates to the shots. And, he rolled those out. Operation Warp Speed, that was him. However, our nation without a republic, without the states that comprise it, the 10th Amendment saying we form this government for our best interest, stake in the ground, here's our border. What do you see in Texas? Texas is saying that's our border, not just the United States border. That's our border. We're defending. And now you see other states rolling in. Florida and South Dakota, others are saying, yeah, you know what? Damn right. That is the purpose of the 10th Amendment. And now we see one man standing saying, yeah, I'll take the slings and the arrows. We got to give him credit for that. He's rebuilding our republic. God bless him. Despite all my problems with him or whatever else, they're irrelevant. He is building our country, and it doesn't matter what happens in Washington, D.C. and those stupid elections they're going to steal through Dominion voting. I doubt anybody's going to show up for that. Instead, people will write down their votes on a piece of paper, and they're going to submit them in their counties, because you know what, elections happen state by state, county by county, and they're going to say, we want that guy. We want, and that is our guy, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. That's what you're going to see happen this year.
So when you have when you're talking about like all of this occurring, obviously they got rid of the gold standard many years ago, and now we're moving into this cryptocurrency of different levels. It seems to be yet another level of potential control that's coming. It's like,
Yeah.
you don't agree with me, so you know what? I'm just gonna not let you use your
Yeah.
bank account. I
We
mean,
saw it.
and I've seen it. Like a friend of mine was part of Trump's was part of Trump's staff on something, and he his business, they couldn't use the credit card processor anymore. All of a sudden, they said, no, you're too controversial, and he had
Yeah.
to rapidly shift to find another credit card processing company because of it. I mean, we can see these different
Yeah.
areas on it, and obviously, again, as a believer, we see this transition. It's becoming more and more open of what's happening in Revelation. And I'm not
Yes.
saying that, it's tomorrow, next year, 100 years, 1,000 years. Obviously, no one knows, but that to me seems like this has been more of kind of a test case
Yeah.
of a coming of the false prophet and the Antichrist, et
I
cetera.
think so. I think
So
so. I've arrived at the same conclusion. I think if we take our planet back, we have 1,000 years of peace we brought to ourselves, and there's a difference, in this fight. The owners are not of this world. They are patient through decades, centuries, even millennia in fulfilling their mission here, which was to transform or eradicate humanity. Every one of God's creations, to be frank with you, is what we came to find in our case. The shots were gene modification shots, and we said, according to existing U.S. case law, that means that the people that got the mRNA shots, Pfizer, Moderna, are now a new slave species, according to existing law. It's Molecular Pathology versus Myriad Genetics, 2013 U.S. Supreme Court case. And my case was, hey, you don't get to own people. It's against the law. 13th Amendment outlaws that. And our Supreme Court said we're not going to hear it. Blah blah blah. My point in saying is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Humanity will arise, whether we are a new species. Borg, actually, as our government named it. They went to the trouble of transforming or destroying humanity. The 1994 Cairo Population Accords, where they agreed 7 billion people got to die. You know what? Wait, there aren't that people are dying from these shots as they intended, but not in the numbers that they want. Why? Because people understand. They're saying, holy cow, these shots were poisonous. What do I do? And they're finding solutions. We got 2,500 doctors or so and scientists that have come up with solutions, and people are finding them. They are not going quietly into the night. And finally, they're coming to understand this was intentional. This was a democide. Our government, in fact, all of the governments brought this. They sought our destruction. And when you dig deeper, Peter, you come to understand why you asked that question. Because they are Luciferians. The people that got these slots traded their souls for those slots, for money, fame, fortune, sex, God knows what it is. But they have traded their souls. We are in the final battle for souls, and I think we're actually winning it. I think humanity is rising. People are finding God. They're building that relationship. And what does it cost to do that? Nothing, not a thing. And that's the way we win this.
the parable of the tares, the wheat and the
Matthew 13:38.
yeah,
We're here.
it grows the exact same level, and they can't do anything until the end.
Right.
And I do think we're seeing and I think we're on the rise of a great revival, and
Yeah.
as we're seeing this evil that's growing up at the same rapid pace of it. And so on some level, I recognize there's a lot of hope in this revival, and
Yeah.
this hope in truth. Uh, and again, I just got to appreciate all that you're doing for it and speaking out. I guess one last question for you. You're obviously not very popular among modern media. I read an article that on Forbes on you that didn't seem to be very flattering of you.
That was great.
So my question for you is obviously, I mean, you're kind of used to it, et cetera, but there still has to be sometimes those 2 a.m. moments where you're like, man, I'm all alone. That Elijah, when he
Not
goes
at
to
all.
the cave. So you kind of, you're good with all that. You're just like, okay, I know what I'm doing is right. And you could just stick with that. Like, where do you find that source of strength? Because there's a lot of people out there that want to speak up, but can't. They're
Oh,
too
that's
afraid.
good.
Where do you find that source of strength to help others, encourage them to speak
Wow.
up and move from there?
What a fascinating question. First and foremost, I will have you know I'm far from alone. And the Forbes was in the courtroom on 18th of November, 2022. I went to oral arguments in the 10th Circuit. The first words out of my mouth is the troops didn't take the shots because they wanted to remain human. Bells and whistles went off, and the justices jumped in. You can't be talking about that, was the effect of what they said. So anyway, and I felt a little bit alone at that point, but the gallery in the 10th Circuit was full. People came from near and far. So no, I felt alone at the microphone, at the podium, talking to three judges, but behind me, there were people in uniform, and they're all nodding their heads like this, and it was fabulous. So not alone at all. And what I came to find is, there's some other really good people. One of my star witnesses, Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, flight surgeon in the U.S. Army. She swore out an affidavit in my case that said, "Hey, Judge, there's polyethylene glycol in these shots. That is the same as antifreeze. You're telling people to put antifreeze in their veins, among other things." And she stood alone for a while in the military. She's also the one that released the DMED database. Colonel Chambers, Pete Chambers. It takes one. He was on assignment in Texas, and his job was to go and prepare all the meatpacking plants for the COVID tests that were coming the next day. And he knew it was up. He was vaccine injured himself. And instead, he went to the meatpacking plant and said, "Hey, you should probably have a sick out." He saved the meatpacking industry, because guess what? Everybody tests positive for COVID at 40 cycles. It was designed that way. And so while the world powers seek to destroy our food, they seek to cut off our fuel, cut off our church. You could go to liquor store, get a lap dance, but you couldn't go to church. Remember this?
Oh, I
So
know. Oh, yeah.
so the point is, God has fulfilled me with a tremendous spirit, and I came to find everybody else that I found standing with me. We've either all had near-death experiences or been dead and came back, and universally so. And that's hundreds and hundreds of people. But for that was enough. We were the first ones standing. But behind us came, in the military, 400,000 service members stood. Look, my case started, the Avalanche, a really brave guy by the name of Dan Robert was our plaintiff. He stood. And as he stood, we had a presumptive class of 200,000 service members who also said, "We ain't going to take your shots." And then that grew to 400,000 service members, to the point where the military, despite being kicked out of court, all these cases, the military had to back down, because they had 24% of their fighting force saying, "We're not doing this." And Congress actually had to put it in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023 that they rescinded the order. Let me put this very clear to you. The biggest, most lethal killing machine on the planet, otherwise known as the US DoD, was tasked with carrying this out, use of force authorized, to give people this experimental kill shot, this gene modification kill shot, and not just the United States, globally, right? They ship these things out globally by C5s and other aircraft. They were tasked with doing this, and we stopped them. We stopped the most lethal killing machine ever known to this planet. How? Because it took one. "I'm not doing this." And he was soon followed by 200,000, and then 400,000. And now you have the planet saying, "No, no, we ain't doing this again." Lo and behold, we're in the middle of a Marburg pandemic right now, right? People are supposed to be falling over dead with blood coming out of their ears and eyes. But I don't see any. Why? Because they can't get away with it. People know it took one. It took Dr. Chambers standing up. It took Dr. Teresa Long standing up. It took Dan Roberts standing. It takes one.
I appreciate it. And I hope those that are listening can be encouraged by this, because yeah, you feel you're all alone, but you're really not. And I think that's just the big part. And I know the times where I've felt like I've had to stand all alone, I'm always amazed at all the people that come and support. And it is absolutely incredible. So again, I appreciate all that you're doing. Clout Hub, I encourage people to start using Clout Hub.
Please.
Right now, but before the end of this day, I'm going to be looking at it and finding out about it, because again, that's an incredible idea, an incredible thought going into it. I'm excited about that as well.
Cool.
Anything else that like any other things that you want people to know, that like to find out more about you, find out more about the Clout Hub or whatever it is that you want? How would you?
Well,
Clout
Hub Meets is how you can do this. Please ditch Zoom, dear God above. Please ditch Zoom for the PRC. Anyway, there's a reason why apps are for free, and why all these things are made so easy, because they want your information. That's the new currency, is your data, and they're trying to gather it from the inside. If you don't believe me, go to a website called inpersona.com, INPERSONA.com, and you will find that they'll mine your biorhythms, your body. They'll mine those to mine cryptocurrency. So you're already hooked into the net. And the answer is no. The stupid 5G towers and the horrific things they're implanting into people with these shots, they're effectively turning people into vaccine chattel property. No, the answer is no. So come to CloutHub. We're in the business of freedom. CloutHub Meets is a replacement to Zoom. I beg you to come and take advantage of it. Pretty soon you'll be able to use 30 minutes of it for free. It's very inexpensive if people want to use it. It has all the same tools. So demand truth of others. That's the other one. Build your relationship with God. Speak the truth and demand it of others, and that'll get us through.
Awesome. Well, again, Todd, I thank you so much. I appreciate
My
it.
pleasure, Peter.
Let me
Thank
know if
you.
I can ever be of assistance to you, and we'll
Deal.
go from there.
All right, brother. God bless you.
Bless you too. Thank you. That was a fascinating conversation I had with Todd, and there was something that really came to me, particularly right at the very end. And I want to read in 1 Kings. In 1 Kings 18, we see Elijah bring down the fires from heaven and destroy and cause the fire. He destroys all the prophets of Baal, and then he from there prays for rain. He has the supernatural ability to run past the chariot after all of this stuff. And so he gets back to the kingdom where you know, Jezebel and Ahab is. And I want to start, and this is in 1 Kings 19, where it says, "Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he killed the prophets by sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, 'May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time I do not make your life like that of one of them.'" And this is the sad part about it, is verse 3 says, "Elijah was afraid and ran for his life." You know, he came to Beersheba. He left a servant there. He went another day's journey after that, hid in some caves, and just started praying that he might die because he was afraid. So often we feel that we're alone. So often we feel that we're standing by ourselves, and that's part of it. That's part of this whole concept of fear that you hear Todd talk about from the beginning to the end. But it's also fear of us. Why are we not speaking out more? Why are we not researching and finding these things? And maybe our circle of influence isn't as powerful as Todd's, but at the same time, we do have a circle of influence of people that we can stand out. And yes, we might not get invited to that Christmas party. We might lose some privileges and some and some stuff that we like. Our life might not be as easy. It might be a little bit more difficult. All this stuff might happen, but we're going to be standing up for truth. And at the end of the day, we know that God has more people around us that we may not be able to see. Elijah had the power of God coming in from all this. And ultimately, what we end up seeing is the fact that he was afraid, that he was scared. But then when God finally, after he kind of restores him and brings him back and sends an angel to help him, you know, and then God talks to him in the still small voice. You know, God tells him, you know, that there are thousands of more prophets that he hid as well. And then he gives him some helpers. Then he gives him Elisha to kind of help support him and support his ministry from it. God is amazing and he's faithful. And yes, you may feel alone and you may feel afraid and you may feel that the powerful forces of whatever, it's our government or your business or whatever is coming against you. But we have on our side the person who spoke the world into existence. We have that person on our side. And if God is on our side, what man can stand against us? So I encourage you to speak out. I encourage you to speak on the things that you know about. Speak about the things that are there and don't just roll over and give into fear. Because as Jesus Jesus says, "Do not be afraid, but only believe." The opposite of fear is trust, and the opposite of fear is belief. And we know that there is a truth, and we know we can trust in God and trust in the truth that he gives us. And there is only one truth, and that truth comes from Jesus. So I thank you so much for coming. I encourage you, if you want to see more information like this, see more shows like this, follow me on Rumble, go to my social media platforms, X, Facebook, all those places that you can see, get more of my content. You can go to peterdemas.org to order books. Whatever that is that you need to that you can do to contact with me. I encourage you to send prayer requests. I pray for everybody who sends something to me, and I just ask that you just spend the time that you have, your quiet time, spending time with the Lord and developing a relationship, because we need him now more than ever. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.